Hello and welcome to another episode of The Nines, presented by AT&T here on the Cloud9 Twitch and YouTube channels. I'm Monte Cristo, and I'm still alone in this studio during the pandemic. But joining me virtually is going to be Jack Etienne, owner, CEO, God of Cloud9, reigning from above, from the heavens. So you don't have a beard anymore. Was this an act of contrition? For the recent losses that Cloud9 has suffered. You know, a lot of people cut their hair. Hair is said to, colloquially contain memories. So when you're going through a life transition, many people decide to make drastic changes to their hair. Is this part of that?
I didn't think about it like that. I thought maybe it makes my masks fit easier, but but I do think there is something there because, I do know right after our loss, I just wanted that thing gone. But I still feel dirty what happened, and it's going to take a lot more, I think, reflection and suffering before I'm in a better place.
When you say you wanted that thing gone, you were referring to your beard and not the League of Legends roster, as we know, because you announced that you're keeping all of the players on board. You're going to attempt the salty run back. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And also yes to both your questions, if that's possible. But yeah, we're sticking with our players. They did incredible work in spring. Obviously, we still see enormous potential in these guys, and we know that they're hungry to improve. And frankly, the experience that we just went through is pretty moving, and definitely has left us with a strong hunger to improve and figure out what went wrong and come back, fighting next year.
So there is an interview for people who are curious on the Cloud9 YouTube channel that I Will Dominate did with the players, talking about kind of what happened and a lot of the inefficiencies regarding practice. And it seems as though you guys came upon an epiphany, too late, obviously much too late, regarding scrims and how your practice was taking shape here in the LCS. Can you explain that epiphany that you had? And why did this epiphany happen so suddenly? Why did it take getting eliminated, losing twice in the summer playoffs for you to reach this state of enlightenment about what you guys were doing wrong?
I mean, it's an interesting question. The thing is I wouldn't say we've actually figured it out. It's we now understand how to fix things. That's not the case. We're just identifying the problem, and that we identified, that we already had problems going into playoffs. We made some adjustments, and the scrims were going incredibly well, but the adjustments we made weren't enough, and we've done a lot of self-reflection and thinking about how we can improve and learn more in our scrims. And so we've come up with some new approaches on how we're going to change the way we practice, which hopefully will lead to more consistent play on stage. I think one of the interesting problems we have is that we have been so dominant in our scrims that we weren't really able to learn any real, we were actually coming away with scrims feeling that we actually improved. We actually felt like we were getting worse and we were learning bad habits in these scrims, because the way you play in scrims, your opponents are taking advantages, they're limit testing, they're trying to figure out, they're taking risks they would never take on stage. And we started developing a play style that required us to snowball really hard, which never actually happened on stage. And
it did for an entire split. Let's be real. It did.
Yeah, it did in spring. But the teams adjusted. They're okay, we can't just butt heads with these guys early game. They smash us. Yeah. So they got a lot more careful on the way they played. The funny thing is, they did that on stage, but they didn't do it in scrims. So we would still just have this insane win rate in scrims. And so we would always feeling, oh, hey, our adjustments that we did for playoffs, they're working. We figured that out. We're going to come in and smash in playoffs, and we get on stage and the same engages weren't happening. The level 1 strategies that the opponents were using were super effective against us, and we weren't. And so we were lost. We were shocked. And even though each game we're do we throw out the 2 weeks of practice that we just did and change everything between games, or do we keep going with what we thought was actually good, which we thought was a good adjustment? And you saw the results. We stuck to our guns and it didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting from the outside watching these playoffs, because you could kind of, for me at least, when I was looking at the FlyQuest series, you could understand why you guys were doing that, trying to play more into the meta. But it was very clear that a lot of the conclusions that you guys had reached were not working, and also, I mean, were just simply not shared by any other teams in the world that were participating in these playoffs either. And so, you kind of take that loss. It's double elimination. It's whatever. So you guys come back and you bounce back against EG, and you guys are running the Callisto lane, trying to have more priority, trying to have more pressure, trying to have more of that early game presence that we're used to seeing from Cloud9 in spring. Works really well. You guys 3-0 EG. And what was confusing to me, at least, was coming back against TSM and then reverting to some of the decisions and play styles that you guys had that were not very effective against FlyQuest. So that I found that kind of confusing, because I understand, you not having a read after you hadn't played on stage in this patch, but then you make changes, but then those changes just go back. And that it was very kind of odd to watch from the outside. What was the process of deciding what to play over the course of these playoffs and these kind of like oscillations back and forth?
Yeah, I mean, part of that process isn't just we need to figure out how to change the way we scrim to get more information out of these scrims, but we also need to change the way we do our drafts for the weekend and make sure that it's more of a reflection of what we're doing in our scrims. I think that like when we were doing our final drafts for the weekend, we each player was individually picking what they felt was their strongest with in lane, but there was not really a game plan there on how the team would function as a whole and how we would actually also disrupt what our enemy was doing. And I think you're right that we did go back to what we thought was we were best at, but it didn't actually work in a team game, and that's part of what we're going to be changing. We put a lot of time into already, like how we're going to change the way we learn in scrims. But the reality is we haven't had a chance to actually put into like actual practice what we're going to change. So I definitely can't say like, oh, we figured it out. Like that would be bullshit. The reality is we don't have an answer yet, but we do believe in our players. And part of what we're going to do is really be evaluating how we actually run each one of our scrims and how we actually approach pick and ban for stage to make sure that our scrims are really giving us good information for that we can apply to a more stage environment where teams are a lot more unwilling to just fight us head on.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and obviously you can't know. And one of the questions that everyone had about Cloud9 is how are you guys getting better in a situation where you're just smashing everybody in spring? Like how are you continuing to maintain this level of dominance? Because that's always the problem with being so good in a region, is that effectively every time you play someone else, they're getting more information out of you than you're getting out of them. And so I guess the answer in the end was it wasn't possible to maintain that level of dominance with the program you had. But I think it's really hard to solve that problem because, I mean, no one has really figured it out, right?
Yeah, and the amount of times that you're in that situation it doesn't happen very often where you're absolutely so incredibly dominant. And there's a lot of other problems that come along with being so dominant because there is an arrogance that comes along with it, that we just know how to figure shit out. We don't actually need to analyze what our enemies are doing and what we're doing. And I think like we definitely had that. From like the coaches, the managers, and the players, it was there, and that weakness is a big part of what took us down. And I think that this experience will be really valuable to us as an organization and to our players and our coaches, not only for next year, but probably for the rest of our careers, because no one will ever be able to get, like, say we're just as dominant next spring. In our hearts, each one of us is going to know exactly how far we can fall. And so just going through this experience will definitely change our approach. And I hope will allow us to catch any sort of arrogance that could happen in the future.
I think about this a lot in terms of how esports compares to traditional sports. And one of the things that I think is very fascinating about your situation is that it only exists in esports. And the reason why that is, and people will be like, well, there are dominant teams in sports too. But the issue is that in esports, we scrim against each other all the time. In sports, you're practicing internally. So if I'm super dominant, the enemy team, they only are facing me in official matches, and it's only occasionally. So you don't get as much time against the elite teams to really get better and improve against them. You know what I mean? Like if I'm an NFL team, I might play the best team in the league once or 0 times in a year, right? Or an NBA team, you're playing that team a few times a season maximum. Whereas at least in esports, there's so few teams in every region. There's only 10, and you guys are practicing constantly against each other. So the number of games you're playing against a specific good opponent so that you can learn from them is infinity times higher, right? And so it makes it much harder to have a good environment because our method of practicing is so much different than traditional sports teams. So my point is we can't even look to traditional sports for how to solve this issue because it just doesn't exist.
Yeah. Unless our development system comes even better than it is today, it'll be hard to do that. And I think what you're saying is absolutely true in that we witnessed through our scrims, our opponents really improving over time. I guess one good thing out of this whole thing is hopefully our region has gotten better. Hopefully the teams that we're sending to Worlds are going to be more equipped. It hasn't,
Jack. It was those players were awful.
Give me my silver lining here, man.
What? No.
You take everything from me. I can go shave my head down.
hey, there's unfortunately watching the quality of these playoffs was really disappointing. Partially because you guys didn't show up in the way that we know and hoped that you could, but also because I feel like Liquid and FlyQuest really dropped the ball. And I think it was good to see the improvement that we saw from TSM, but unfortunately, watching the playoffs, I felt like the only team that played better was TSM.
Yeah.
And you hate to see that in the playoffs, right? You hate to see it.
Yeah. I mean, what I did like seeing is it was really fun to watch because we saw Spica, how he played in scrims, and he was actually always one of the best junglers we saw in scrims, but it wasn't translating to stage through the year. But as playoffs, through this playoffs, you saw him step up and become the player that we saw in scrims. So that was really cool to see that development of that player and that team in general. They have definitely I think my hoping is that they do well at Worlds. But in general for the region, the playoff quality wasn't great.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately for TSM, I think that there's time for them to improve on this, so it's certainly not the only way they have to play, but I think a lot of their wins were coming off of Bjergsen on Zillion or Twisted Fate, and that just isn't punished in lane the way that it would be in any other region. So the fact that he's getting even or getting priority on these mid lane champs because the mid laners are pretty not good in NA. I think if they don't make that an adaptation away from that they're just going to get pounded at Worlds because he's not going to get away with those shenanigans against Showmaker and Chovy, right?
Yeah, I would agree. But I think at least with Bjergsen, he's an incredible player. I think he'll be able to adjust out there. But I think it'll be more difficult for some of the other players to really adjust. But I'm excited to see, and I do hope that they'll do well.
Well, that's one of us. That doesn't excite me, Jack. The constant inevitable downfall of TSM every year, that's what gets me going,
I think
so I wish you would have just beaten them, frankly, but
me too. But I think that this is the year. I think this is the year that Doublelift gets out of groups. I do.
We'll see. Bold prediction for sure. So talking about the players, you guys want to keep everybody on board coming into next year. Is that extending at all to the academy roster? Because your academy team, for those of you who don't know, actually did win both spring and summer splits, has had some really solid performances. I imagine some teams, LCS teams, will probably be interested in some of those players, but
I'm really interested to see, like, what these academy players can bring in as far as like offers from LCS teams. Historically, most of the LCS teams have been too afraid to try new rookie talent, especially NA rookie talent. So I'll be very curious to see what progresses with that. I've never actually been, out of the running this early before and available to actually start talking with teams, because we can't even sign these players, I think, until November 17th or so.
Yeah.
So anything we actually talk about with other teams, we can't actually finalize anything now for months. God, it's kind of crazy to think for the last 8 years I've been at Worlds, so I've never actually sat around this long before. It's horrifying, but also nice at the same time. But I'll be talking to a lot of teams. I'll try to find places for these guys like Diamond has put in his time. He's like literally, I think, gotten first place in the regular season, something like four splits in a row. He's won it 2 times. Like, this guy I've seen him scrim against the top teams in the LCS, and he's got a winning record against these LCS teams. So, like, what's it going to take for this guy to get out? Palafox is incredible. Fudge is incredible. Like, Honori's he looked really great in playoffs, his last 2 splits. So I hope I can find them spots to show what they can on the biggest stage in North America. But we'll see what the owners come back with.
Are you planning on potentially running some sort of like 6-man roster again next year with any of these players, or have you made any decisions around that system yet potentially, or you just want to keep it with the same core 5 like you did in 2020?
I'm going to be going into this boot camp with the understanding that the current 5 is our 5 that we're going to go with. I'm not saying that it's impossible, because there's a lot of time between now and then. But my initial take is that we run it back with these guys and see what they can do.
So one thing you haven't announced yet is the coaches. So you've committed to the players very publicly right now. There hasn't been any word about what you're doing with the current coaching staff, which includes Reaper, Westrice, Rapid Star, these guys. Have you given any thought to that, or are you still waiting to see what's going to happen?
It's a good question. The thing is that we I feel that the biggest problems that we had going into this last split was the quality of practice and our preparation for the games. So that means it comes down solely onto the coaching staff to guide that. So we're kind of reevaluating, like, how do we need to bring in additional coaching, change the configuration of how things work? Should we like having someone just fully focus on draft? And so we're evaluating all these things right now. We do know that what we're currently doing isn't working, so we're going to need to make adjustments. And I hope to have that figured out in the next week or two to have a plan that we can start building around.
What areas do you think, like, you mentioned like having a draft coach? Which areas do you think you would also try and bolster? Which parts of the kind of team dynamic do you think were a little bit lacking or led to this kind of regression, let's say? Because, honestly, at the start of spring, your players were all super motivated. We talked a lot about Cloud9's culture and how that was going to change things, and how you had this workout regimen that they were going through every day, and that there was a certain mentality that you were working on with your performance coach. So it seemed like it was all going very well, and indeed it was for a while. But as time went on, did you identify any holes that you think you need patching up in terms of the support staff?
Honestly, it's more about being willing to challenge the status quo and not be afraid to say, hey, I don't think this is working, or we need to actually swap this up. I think really what happened is, going into summer, that we felt we had the winning recipe to get through summer and go to Worlds. And when we started seeing the cracks, no one was really willing to stand up and say, "Hey, this is wrong." And it needs to come from the coaches, but the players also need to be challenged as well. And so it's I don't have anything to present today because we're still trying to figure it out. But we are actively talking about it on a daily basis. And we are already we plan to come into next boot camp. Like, we're not going to solve this at boot camp. We plan to be working with the coaching staff and with the players directly to have our system like really hashed out well before we even show up in boot camp. And what's really nice is that this isn't something that we're having to challenge necessarily the players on. They all feel it. They all want the change. They all want to be pushed. And so as a group, we're going to be approaching this and looking to get better. And I already see it, like, players are coming to us saying, "Hey, maybe what if we approach it this way? What if we took this scenario on instead, for our learning plan?" And we're going to be collecting all these thoughts and challenge everyone to like, okay, do you like this? You don't like it? If you don't like it, you need to come to us with ideas of like how else we would approach it. And we hope to have like a really nice like list of ways that we're going to improve for next season and like a real solid scheduling of how we roll it out.
When you keep talking about this boot camp, for people who don't know, Cloud9 does have a permanent facility in Korea. Are you approaching, as you mentioned earlier, you're not going to Worlds, are you approaching the offseason any differently this year in terms of practice or giving players time to rest? Because you've never had this much time before. So in your mind, when does the boot camping start for you guys, or what is the alterations that you've made to your offseason plans?
Yeah, it's super difficult right now to actually nail down exactly what we're going to do because of the COVID situation. If we were to we are planning to, we have a plan to boot camp in Korea. How's that going to look? We also have a plan to boot camp here in North America. How does that look? It's good. The one thing we have to be is really flexible based on the where the world's at. Optimally, we would be at our facility in Korea that provides the best practice. There's really good teams to scrim. The solo queue environment is super good, but the reality is, under the current conditions, the players would go to Korea like with a laptop, with a monitor. They would all be individually quarantined at a place where the government tells us to go. I don't even know if it's going to have good internet or internet at all.
It does. It does.
Okay, yeah.
I can tell you because like some of my colleagues, like Wolf and some of the people at Overwatch League, Achilleos, have actually done that, and everywhere in Korea has good internet. But yeah, it is basically just being locked in a hotel room and them giving you food for 2 straight weeks. It's not fun.
Yeah, it's definitely not fun. And how do we do it? Do we show up and for the first 2 weeks we just play solo queue for 2 weeks, then go to the facility and then we start practicing, or do we immediately just start like trying to scrim in a few days? So we're going to put together like a plan on what like going to Korea will look like, and also what going to doing it in North America will look like. Obviously, Korea is like it's vastly superior in the quality of the practice we get out of it, but there's a lot of health concerns around it, as well as just like, if we do this, if we go to Korea, it'll be 2 weeks of quarantine in Korea, and then the players are going to want to go home for Christmas. That's 2 weeks of quarantine, like, at home, and then all right, let's get back out to North America like on January 3rd to get ready for the season. Another 2 weeks of quarantine. So literally within like a month or so, like in 2 months, you're going to have like 6 weeks of quarantine, which is pretty miserable.
And also, the problem too is how valuable is practice when we don't even know, with how much League of Legends changes every single year due to the massive patches that we always have after Worlds to keep things fresh. I mean, you really have to evaluate what is the value of going and scrimming right now, because even if you were there's a world where you guys could, in fact, basically just follow your Worlds plan, except go to Korea instead of China, quarantine for 2 weeks in Korea, and then scrim against all the Worlds teams. Surely you would be a great practice partner for anyone because you're not actually involved in the tournament itself. So there's kind of a unique opportunity there. But the question is, if you do that, what is the purpose of all that hard work when you're preparing for a season next year where you don't even know what the metagame's going to be or what the valuable skill sets to practice are, right? So it's a tough call.
I mean, like the actual the in-game information we get would be pretty much worthless. Because most likely things would change a lot. What we would really be gaining from that process would be really scaling up our ability to learn in scrims in a different way, and making sure that we come into next season with an actual practice style that's working for us. Because no matter how much like we come up with these great ideas now, like outside of actual practice, like probably half our ideas are going to be shit, and we won't know it until we actually try it. And so the best thing that for me and for the coaches would just be that experience of rolling out these new ways of practicing and figuring out which is working, and then adjusting to a better style, and be more comfortable with it with our players and our coaches, and be better at it by the time we get back to North America. That would be like, for me, probably the biggest takeaway from a Korean boot camp. So yeah.
So, but maybe not until the new year. That way you don't have to keep going back and forth for the holidays or what have you, right?
Yeah, well, if next year starts the same time as this year, it'll be around January 26th. So we have to be back in North America like around the 3rd. So if we want to go to Korea, my guess the best thing to do would be to go out there like mid-November, quarantine for 2 weeks, and then we could start doing scrims against mostly Korean teams that are getting ready for like the KESPA Cup. And we would probably finish scrims around like the 10th of December, which would allow people to get home, quarantine for 2 weeks, and hang out for Christmas. So there's a lot of planning that will go into seeing if we can make this happen. And if it looks like, we'll get a lot out of it and it's safe for our players, we'll do it. If not, we'll do it all in North America.
I mean, definitely not the ideal practice location, but it's tough right now. Have you, going back to the pandemic, are you guys making any changes to how you're operating? Because you've been locked down since March, basically.
Yeah.
And the players haven't left the facility. I haven't been to the facility, right?
I've never been to that studio you're at. I'd love to check it out.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you've been you created a truly like sealed environment, where I know even when you guys were making content, you would put the Cloud9 content team into 2-week quarantines before they could, enter the team house and everything like that. So it's been truly like a bubble for you guys. Are you guys changing anything about how you're operating in that capacity?
Not until there's a viable vaccine. So we'll keep doing this, and it's so we're planning to go through the entire next year if need be like this, and it sucks, but like we got to do what we got to do to keep our players and our staff healthy.
Are your players going home at all now that the season's over?
So all of them except I think Fudge. Is
I talked to Fudge on this show, and he was like, I can't leave.
He can't leave. He really can't.
Stuck.
He goes to Australia. He's not getting out.
Right.
They're taking it really seriously there, and they won't let you leave. So he's hanging around, and we're going to still have our strength trainer coming like 3 times a week, and so I'll be working out with Fudge and the coaching staff and the managers, and in the meantime. But like next year, like it's going to be the same thing all over again. We might change where we do our stage games, because currently we would go to one of our other team houses, and so we might juggle like the housing around, because as much as we all actually do, like I think love each other and it is really friendly, I do want to kind of shift around the living arrangement a bit, because I think we've been here a long time and we've been stuck in the same place for a long time. So I think as much as we can do to make it a little different next year, I'm going to try to do it. But as far as like the general like health plan and how we keep our players and staff safe, it's going to be the same.
Understood. So it sounds like got a good take on all of the League of Legends stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
But you like you said, you have a lot of time, Jack, and I'm really glad you have a significant amount of time, because that means you can make the Counter-Strike team better, which is directly beneficial to me. So the things you've actually given me 2 great gifts, Jack. Did you know, by losing? So first off, you sent TSM to Worlds, which is actually just great for my content numbers, because people love it when I shit on TSM. And second off, now you have all the time in the world to work on Counter-Strike so that they can play in Flashpoint in my tournament this winter. So I'm psyched you didn't make Worlds. Now we can focus on the things that matter to me, Monte Cristo, right? This is a great gift. So thank you.
No, you're welcome.
So as
just for you, man. That's what was the plan.
We discussed this before you made the hire, but you've been making some big moves in Counter-Strike, and the most notable one was that you got Henry G, on the CSGO side to become the general manager. And in the continued process of all great casters, including myself, moving into different roles within esports, which has been a very common theme.
It's a trend right now, right? It's wild.
Well, it's because casting is not great after a certain point. It's not just difficult, it's that there's not enough agency in the space for casters, and so once you kind of hit the ceiling of what you can do in a game with casting, it becomes a lot less attractive because you feel like there isn't career progression. And I think that's been like a pretty common theme among a lot of the people who've left. Moses, Henry G, Jat recently, Papa Smithy, me. Been a lot of people, been a lot of like top tier casters. And frankly, it sucks because I miss listening to these people and I will miss Henry G's commentary. But I'm also very excited because I think he's going to dramatically improve the quality of one of our Flashpoint partner teams. And as a bonus, he doesn't cast for ESL anymore. So, that's a win in its own right.
There's lots of wins here. And I think I'm sure he can make a lot of content with you. So I'm pretty excited about what he's going to make there. And, it's funny because as we're heading towards Worlds, I was really excited to get this team to China and kind of so I could focus on all the things we're working on here because we have Counter-Strike and I've got another 3 teams actually that we've been working on that are really exciting and that required a lot of my time. And so I was like, man, I can't wait for these guys. They'll qualify for Worlds. They'll be off. They'll be out of my hair. I can focus on all the other stuff. And what actually happened is our team exploded. So now I've got one additional project that I'm getting my hands dirty with right now. So that really sucked.
Oh, Jack, that's not true. I know you. Even if you had qualified for Worlds and you hadn't have gone, you love that League of Legends team is like another child for you. You would have been paying.
Pretty much.
You would have. So you saying you have more time because if they would have qualified, I don't believe you.
All right, it's just a lot less happy time.
Exactly.
It's just pretty sad. But yeah, going on to Henry, I was, I wouldn't say I was happy. I definitely wasn't happy with the performance of our current team, but I believed in them and I was hoping that they would improve over time. But when when I became aware that Henry was actually looking to do a shift, I was like, whoa, this is one of those very rare opportunities to get someone who is incredibly knowledgeable and has a fire inside that for the sport that's really rare to find. I knew I had to jump at it. I was like, this is, stop everything we're doing. This is crazy. This is a really good opportunity. We actually have to shift gears to make sure that that we get this guy and that we put the support behind him that he needs to build a team that he thinks is good. I think within a matter of 48 hours of talking to him, I had a contract in front of him. There was other people at the company who talked to him before me, but by the time I talked to him, I need to get this guy. And it was really fun to, we hired him, but he'd already had this whole plan on how we were going to improve the team. And it was been really fun to, watch him, negotiate with agents, talk to players, and listen to him basically talk about his plan on what he's going to be build. And I was getting excited. I was ready to sign up. We've announced the coach. But we've got some really exciting signings already that we're pretty much ready to announce, but the team is not done. And I think it's really important that are there any players out there that if they like what Henry's looking to build, they like the coaching staff that we've brought on, they like some of the announcement that the players that we're going to be announcing in the next couple of days, and they want to be a part of it, to reach out to us because there's still opportunities here.
Yeah, and going back before we talk more about Henry, I want to touch on the current/old CSGO roster that you had, because a big part of the Cloud9's kind of culture push was that let's get these young, hungry players who may not have had a lot of opportunities into our facilities, integrated into our workout program, and they live down the street from the League of Legends house. Correct. And we think that this is going to improve the players. They didn't really get a lot better over this time. So do you have any kind of reflections on the Cloud9 culture or the program you were implementing that you think could have been done better, or anything you learned from this process as a team?
There is a sense of missed opportunity because we had a lot of plans on how we would like use our infrastructure to make them better. But the reality is, once COVID hit, it had a really like stifling effect on us to be able to work with them. And like you brought up the workout, like, you know, we have a strength trainer that comes out here every day and we have a gym to work out in. But because I was being so careful to isolate the League of Legends team, we decided to basically not use that program with our Counter-Strike team. I didn't want players that from two different houses working out in the same gym, because you basically lose all the protection of like trying to keep them isolated away from each other.
Sure.
So they didn't get to you know, benefit from a lot of the infrastructure we have because they were siloed into their own house. And so although they had like some of our greater structure, like, you know, that was still accessible to them, a lot of the day-to-day, you know, like I would generally work out and hang out with the players like almost on a daily basis in a non-COVID world. I can't do that in today's world. And so I don't think we ever got to see the full opportunity, the full like potential of these players wasn't actually reached, and that's a bit disappointing. So I think they could be greater than what they have done. But the thing is what Henry wants to do is he wants to be working with European players as well as some North American players. And guess what? Like, we can't bring in European players to North America. It's just, we can't even get visas right now in this current climate. So this team, and you know, Henry might kill me for like talking about this, like most likely is going to be located in Europe, because that's where we can actually collect the best players together, and that's where they're going to get the best practice.
Yeah, and I think you know, when we look at the Cloud9 system, part of it is that for Counter-Strike, there aren't that many teams in North America, right? And so it's very hard to get the same quality of practice when you're here. So the absence of the ability to go to Europe to boot camp, because remember, in CS, you're playing against the entire world, right? It's not like in League of Legends where they're mostly playing against other North American teams, and that's kind of the standard by which they are measured. In Counter-Strike, because even many of the North American teams went to Europe and are still in Europe, like MIBR is still in Europe right now during the pandemic, right? So the scrims became even more rare, I would say, in the North American scene for CSGO, and it makes it a lot harder for you guys to reliably improve when you have such a small pool of competitors here.
Yeah, I mean, they're essentially practicing against the same teams over and over again.
Yes.
Like, I don't even know how many games we played against Gen G. It's just crazy, right? Because we just have a very, you know, limited pool of folks to practice and play against. And so right now, like, I expect us to probably have a mostly European team for next year, where we can actually benefit from good practice and have access to other teams to work against.
In the short term, you say, and it makes sense to have the team in Europe. In the long term, do you still envision having the team based in the States and in Los Angeles?
Yeah, 100%. Like, everyone that we're hiring knows that LA is the long-term plan. And once like visas are available and COVID's not a problem, I'm going to want everyone to come out here.
One of the big moves that you announced already was getting Kassad as a coach. And Kassad is very interesting to me because he was the coach of Renegades and 100 Thieves. So this was after I had sold Renegades, but it was still the same kind of core roster of players. And I saw how he transformed the players that I had into this kind of world-class top 10 team, right? Which was a dramatic improvement over time. And even though he's not with 100 Thieves any longer, they changed their coach, he was one of the big free agent coaches that was available and is generally thought of in the Counter-Strike community as being one of the best. Was this a Henry recommendation, or how did you land on Kassad?
Even before Henry became available, we knew he was looking for a new home, and he was actually a very attractive option. We interviewed with him. We were trying to figure out, like, hey, can we bring this to our existing coaching staff and will it work? And there was a lot of hesitation on like, the current team, like our, now I guess soon to be former team at some point. They're really tight in how they're working with the players and the coaches, and they weren't really interested in mixing that up at that time. And so we felt like, hey, that's a real missed opportunity. But once Henry came on, Henry was like, this is the guy I want. And we already like, hey, we already really are impressed with Kassad. So it worked out really well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that was working well on your Counter-Strike team was the coaching element, because in the absence of the ability to get good, high quality practice partners, one of the things where the current/old roster was shining was in kind of strategic moves and unique tricks or flashes, or having some surprising tactics within the game. And the game plans were generally quite solid when it came to the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's take a little bit of a break and do the roundup right now. We'll come back with a Puma giveaway, and then let's take some questions from Twitch chat, because I'm sure people have some of their own to ask you.
Sounds good.
Howdy there, buckaroos and buckarettes, and welcome to another edition of the Cloud9 Roundup here on the Nines, presented by AT&T. Well, it might not have been the prettiest end to that LCS season, but if you are a fan of our 5 players, well, good news for you. They'll all be making the salty run back together next year. With the same lineup, Cloud9 looks forward to the 2021 LCS season. If you'd like some more details, I Will Dominate did an interview with the LCS team to discover what went wrong with the summer split, and you can watch that on the Cloud9 YouTube channel. Well, it's the end of an era for Cloud9's CSGO team. They fall 1-2 to Furia and 0-2 to Evil Geniuses in EPL. But for every end to Cloud9 Counter-Strike, there's always a new beginning, and that new beginning is starting today. Famous caster, my friend Henry G, well, he's going to be the new general manager of the Cloud9 CSGO roster. What's more, they tapped famous Coach Kassad to come and help out, train up the new team. While we're still waiting on those roster announcements, don't worry, I'm sure they're coming soon. On to some other game news. Over in Teamfight Tactics, our very own Krogan casted the Teamfight Tactics Galaxy Championship this past week alongside my good friend Doa, so check out those VODs if you missed them. On the Hearthstone side, Cloud9 Flurry took a 3-1 win against Possessi in Grandmasters. Cloud9 Dawn took 1 win, 3-1 against Tom, and 1 loss, 2-3 against Bank Yugi, also in Grandmasters. On the org side, we would like to welcome Chris as the newest Cloud9 streamer. And also, we are excited to announce that we here at Cloud9 have a new audio partner in EPOS, so go check out some of their nice headsets. Finally, you can look forward to Cloud9 continuing its youth initiative by kicking off the Training Grounds Fall 2020 session. If you're a youngin' and you're looking for some training, you might want to check out those training grounds. Well, that does it with this week's episode of the Cloud9 Roundup. Now back to the Nines, presented by AT&T.
Well, we're back, and it's time for a Puma giveaway. So if you are 18 years or older and you live in North America, you can win a Puma gift card. Congratulations. Type hashtag Puma in chat, and you'll be entered, and you'll be contacted in the Twitch chat itself. So now we're going to go on to questions, and we do have an interesting one. I should have asked you this earlier. When you saw the announcement that the Vietnamese teams weren't going to be competing in Worlds, did you have a brief glimmer of hope that they would announce like a 4th LCK and LCS slot to be competing in the World Championship? What was the process like? Did you know in advance that wouldn't happen, or were you like, oh shit, there's a chance?
I was super hopeful that maybe we could figure this out. I'm like,
that's
oh my
so
God,
cruel for Riot.
Maybe Riot can make up for us missing MSI. This is great. It's all coming together. Wrote to the commissioner, like, yo, Chris, this is your chance. Make it happen. He's like, I've already fought to make this happen. It's not going to happen, Jack. And I was like, no. And, all players, coaches, managers, we were all really kind of hoping maybe there's a glimmer of hope to make this thing happen. And it was a crushing defeat after another crushing defeat. So, not going to happen.
That glimmer of hope is probably the cruelest thing that they could have done to you. God damn
it.
It just doubles down on the sadness you were already feeling. I was thinking about you in that moment, partially because of, I have a strong sense of Schadenfreude, so I kind of get amused by that, but also because, I was like, interesting, there might be an opportunity here. It would be fun to see the 4th LCK and the 4th LCS team competing if the Vietnamese teams are unable. Did they give you a reason why it didn't happen?
I didn't get a real reason, but I imagine because in a non-COVID world, I think it would probably be a lot more likely. But it's super difficult to get teams out there, and going from having all arrangements made for 3 teams to fly out on an airline and safely be brought into China. Suddenly making it 4 and staff, it's just it's daunting, and so I think you reduce basically reducing your workload or making it even harder. They're probably like, hey, let's just not mess this up. Let's make sure this thing goes off without a hitch, because if we fail at making this world's run properly in a COVID world, what's that mean for next year? So I think I think they probably made the right decision, as much as it hurts.
Yeah, it is a little bit disappointing, though, just not to have the full gamut of 24 teams at Worlds. Riot trolled me really hard as well in this process, because I woke up one morning and there was this announcement that says Worlds 2020 format update, and here I am thinking, fuck yes, double elimination, and it's just no, just no Vietnamese teams. No, this isn't what I wanted at all.
That would have been something. I would love to see a massive group stage where we all play each other and fight it out for seeding. More like a TI style, but that's not going to happen.
Well, not this year.
Maybe. Yeah. Hey, there's always hope, right?
Jack, I've been waiting for 10 years for them to do something cool with the Worlds format. So I've been carrying that torch for a long time. Maybe next year will be the year that we actually get a good format at the World Championship.
No.
Yeah,
but I always lean into the method that gets the most games and ends up with the best team winning these things. And that's why I love I really want to bring best of 3 back to North America, but the reality is a lot of people don't like it. It is what it is.
Here's a great question for you. What sort of commitment and investments are being made into the Cloud9 Valorant team? Do you see Valorant as being able to compete with CSGO in esports?
So I think I've definitely hit a turning point with Valorant where I really believe in it now. I think that the Flashpoint Pop Flash event was for me the best event that I've seen, and of course I'm biased, but I think it was the best event that I've seen.
No, it was objectively the best. I did a great job. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, you did, and props to you for that. But I watching that event, and it's watching the increases in quality event after event, and I'm sure each event watched that prior event and said, okay, this is great, I'm going to take the good stuff from it and improve on it here. And I felt like that last event, the Pop Flash event, was so good that it actually is competitive in the viewing experience, spectating experience for with Counter-Strike. And that got me really excited. And for me, that's when I'm ready to unlock a lot more dollars to make sure this team is going to be good, because I actually really believe in the esport of this game now. And so we're going to continue to double down on that game, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
What do you think would be the best way for Riot to handle this esport? Because obviously Riot has said publicly, well, we're looking at all of the opportunities. We might not take this in-house. We're looking at partners potentially to operate it more like Counter-Strike. That's an open circuit, but maybe they franchise, maybe they don't, right? But it's a different world now. When they franchised, when LCS started, Riot was definitely capable of spending more money than anybody else, creating a better production quality to really push esports in the West to a new level. But ever since then, and also, as a part of those efforts that they had, the market has grown substantially to where now it's possible for independent operators to provide a high-quality viewing experience that wouldn't have been possible in 2013 when the LCS was formed. So you could make an argument that it was much more necessary to do it in the early days of esports than it is now. There's more options for Riot. So if you could design the Valorant competitive circuit, what would it look like to you? Would you want like a franchised LCS model? Would you want a more open model? Would you want some sort of hybrid system where teams are franchised but the tournaments are operated independently by different people? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the biggest weaknesses with the current League of Legends like franchise process is that there's the distinct lack of international events, right? We have 2 events. And that's crazy to me because I think those are the most hype events.
I mean, we could have told them that when they invented the system, but continue.
Yeah. And
this was known. This was known.
I mean, and I don't really want to shit like on Riot because what they did, like, I feel like it revolutionized esports and they really pushed it forward to a way that this is something that I could sell to sponsors to be able to support these teams. But I want to see it grow and get better. And I love all the international events I see with Dota and with Counter-Strike. And I want to see whatever system that they design. I want to make sure that we see those international events happening so we know which team is actually the best team from where, because right now with League of Legends, most of the year we have no idea how Korea is stacking up against LPL, stacking up against Europe, and then how bad North America is, because like it doesn't matter how much we blasted in spring, we're never going to know how good that Cloud9 spring team was because they never got a chance to go internationally. So they could have been absolutely crap internationally, and that really sucks. And
I was looking forward to seeing that, so I'm bummed personally.
Yeah, and the fact that we only have two events a year right now where we can actually see how these teams stack up against each other, it's not enough, and it's hype killing, and so I want to see I definitely want to see a lot more international events, and I have been really impressed by some of the events that have been done in Valorant so far. I think that we could, like, the existing models of having like partners run the events is totally viable. We've seen that it's viable in Counter-Strike, and so I don't think we necessarily need to recreate the wheel. So as long as I'm seeing high quality international events happening on a regular basis, I'm happy. And so I need to make sure that those boxes are checked.
There's just so many ways you could go about it, right? And I find it a very interesting, maybe I'll make my own video about this, like a very interesting thing to think about and discuss, because part of the, if you go full CSGO, part of the problem is that the players are constantly on the road, the casters are constantly on the road. You're talking about like 200 days a year that teams are traveling, and that's really, really difficult to maintain. And the players don't really like it, and the casters don't really like it, the production teams don't really like it, but it's just kind of the way it's operating. And part of that is because Valve doesn't, outside of the majors and the minors, doesn't really carve up the calendar. So it's kind of a free-for-all where you work with the other tournament organizers to kind of like block off time. But this is all to say that there is a world where, you could pay a franchise fee for Cloud9, and then what that does is that Riot then dictates a series of events that are the circuit where all franchise teams are participating, but you can kind of control, you're not necessarily controlling the production, but you're controlling the calendar, and you're controlling sort of who gets into the ecosystem via the teams, which I think could be a very interesting hybrid model.
It actually sounds really good. I mean, because I like having the different tournament organizers compete against each other to make a better product.
Me too. I'm somebody who is in that, and I think it makes me better, right? So
I think it challenges each other, and each TO will have their own like flavor to the event, which I think is really fun, and I think it makes it like a different experience for the spectator and for the actual pros. So I think like some type of hybrid system that ensures that we don't end up with like an ungodly amount of events that we're going to. I think it's really important.
Well, I think you could also do kind of more mini seasons, right? Because if part of the problem is the constant moving, then you could have, a 6-week or 2-month block with this TO, then take some time off, then come back and do the same block with a different TO, right? There's a lot of really cool ways you could do it, and in that way, it's kind of more similar to Formula One, in that each event, in each race in Formula One has its own flavor, right? But it's the same teams that are competing across the entire circuit.
Right.
And
I think,
yeah,
I think it's really important to have these events to be in their own way standalone. So they have like a beginning, middle, and end, like, the group stage and fighting out through the brackets, an actual champion at the end of that event in an encapsulated amount of time. I think it's really fun, and also allows us to, with working with multiple TOs, we're able to have events in a lot of different cities really easier, especially in areas that the TO might be, that might be their home base. And so I think one of the things that's really sad about LCS is that we're always in LA for 18 weeks out of the year. And so most of North America never gets to have a chance to actually meet the players, see an actual stage game. And in comparison to like my Counter-Strike team, they're all over the world too much, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
They're all over the place and building relationships with people all over the place. And we need some middle ground there to, I think, to make it a better system.
Yeah, I think there's like a really intriguing opportunity with Valorant to kind of hybridize those systems in a good way. Speaking of changing to a tournament format, that's one of the things that Overwatch League did this year, which is that they moved from the league format into these micro tournaments. It's been really successful, I would say. It's been a really positive change. Along those lines, what are your thoughts about those format changes? And then also, people are asking updates on what you want to do with London Spitfire as well, because we hadn't talked about them so far.
Yeah, so they're really good changes. I think they're really important. I think it's something actually that I know that a lot of the owners were actually, before Overwatch League even kicked off, saying, hey, I think like instead of having all these home games in our cities, we should be having, me too. A lot of us were like, this is not the best way to do it. And then I think they heard what we talked about and then pushed it into Call of Duty, and they saw that the events were much more fun for the fans and for the players and for the people at home watching these events. So they started pushing that into Overwatch League, which is great. For next year for Overwatch, like we just finished our season, and so and again, it was another disappointing turn of events. This entire year has been extremely difficult for that team. That team was located, in New Jersey, and during the height of COVID, it was a real mess for our team. We had to basically get them out of there because we were really concerned about their health. We never actually talked about this, but some of the staff and players ended up getting sick, and they were in the hospital, and going through that whole process was really difficult and scary. And thankfully, everyone is okay from that. But this year, definitely did not roll out the way that we had wanted. We actually wanted to have teams against. Against North, we wanted to have scrims and games against North American teams because we felt like the Asian teams were much stronger. But we didn't get that opportunity to actually build synergy, and they came out to Asia, and it was really difficult for those guys. They, the health, moving, more difficult opponents. It was a difficult season. It didn't get to roll out the way we wanted to,
especially with a team of mostly rookies as well, right?
Yeah,
I mean, and also you had like the full 12-player roster, and there was a lot going on there. There was a lot going on.
There was a lot of challenges, and we're going to make a lot of changes. I'm not ready to announce everything yet, but there are going to be significant changes in this team for next year, and I think people are going to get really excited about it. I'm not ready to share everything yet at this point because I don't really have the plan to share yet, but expect huge changes for the Spitfire team.
And in terms of the strategy, it's obviously going to be really difficult for Overwatch League to enact their plan for next year, presumably, because of the pandemic and the kind of global uncertainty of it. And in many ways, Overwatch and Counter-Strike were hit harder than most other esports because of the nature of their kind of rotating tournament circuits and the homestand plans that Overwatch League has. What do you hope that Overwatch League does next year in terms of the format and the way things are shaking out when it comes to the competition? Because it's very difficult when they had ambitions of being this like truly global league for the first time ever in history of any sport or esport, right?
Yeah, the timing couldn't have been any worse.
Yeah, it's
to be honest.
pretty fucking awful.
I mean, we had like venues booked. We had much different plans than what actually happened. And I think we're going to see a lot of what happened, this year at the end of the year on how we handled matches and scrims. And it's going to continue on next year. It's going to be online play. How the London Spitfire in particular has some difficulty there because we're one of 2 European teams,
right?
And so if we were both Paris and London were located in Europe, we'd essentially only have one other scrim partner that we could actually have on an acceptable ping, and all of our games online are going to be at 80 plus ping, right? And obviously we'll figure out some way to equalize that ping between the teams, but there's going to be some issues we need to figure out, and I don't have the answers on it yet. So when I do, I'll be making an announcement, but I don't have it yet.
Good stuff. Okay, I think that gets to most of the questions that people had surrounding the other divisions. So it's been a really helpful update kind of across everything with Cloud9 right now. I'm looking forward to, I mean, you actually did hint that you had some other projects that you're working on now in addition to Counter-Strike. Do you want to tease any of those, or?
Let me think. We'll be announcing 2 new FPSs that we're more involved with soon, and one that's completely different. And so
cool.
I think that's the biggest hint I can give at this point.
That's a good hint.
We have been very active in getting involved with other games that we're super excited about. So we haven't just been sitting around, crying about our elimination from LCS. We've been very busy before that time and after that time, and we're gonna have a lot to share with all of our fans in the next few weeks.
Sounds great. All right, well, thank you very much for joining me here on the Nines presented by AT&T. It's been an excellent insight into the Cloud9 organization. So we'll be back next week.
Thanks for having me, man.